Hi, welcome back to the EV Life podcast. I'm your host, Crystal, and I'm here with Hannah Neal. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk about today's episode with you.
Yeah, so I spoke to Susan Courty, who is a construction electrician, and she's also a volunteer with this organization called Women in Renewable Energy.
Yeah, so Susan does a lot of work in terms of research and development around integrating heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles in the construction industry and on construction sites. And so she kind of dives into what's being developed in that area. And it's a very new
space. Yeah, it's quite new, right? So she talks about how there really isn't a lot of adoption of heavy-duty ZEVs today, but she sees that changing.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that's still in the early stages, but could be something that is more and more prevalent on construction sites and in the construction industry down the road. And so we're kind of having that early conversation of,
what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's listen to my interview with Susan Courty. I hope you enjoy. Hi, Susan. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Hi.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you do in relation to the ZEV industry? And sorry for our listeners, ZEV is, of course, zero-emission vehicle.
Well, I'm a newly certified Red Seal construction electrician, and I'm currently based out of Edmonton. I started in the trade with the goal of working in renewable energy and have done that for about 3 years so far in my career. Previously, I worked as a chemical lab tech and studied chemical technology and environmental management. And for most of my career, the environmental impacts of my work have been a consideration. And so in regard to the ZEV industry and working in construction, I'm an advocate for the R&D aspect. And being trained in science, I know that one of the things that's important for me is to see that decisions for projects and things like that are based on logic and data and proof of the applications. Currently in Alberta, the industry is fledgling, and we need people to be willing to discover the different technologies and different ways of doing things.
Yeah, and just for our audience listening, can you just explain a little bit like what a construction electrician is?
For sure. So a construction electrician is an electrician who works on a job site building things that involve electrical equipment. So for myself, that's included most recently working in the solar utility industry. So installing the wiring for a solar farm, connecting modules up to what they call inverters to supply power to either directly to a customer, like behind the meter, or to the grid.
So it really kind of varies, right? Depending on what site you're on.
Yeah. It could be doing, house wiring or installing lighting in a building or things for the oil field.
So you go to quite a lot of different sites. Are you seeing heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles being used in construction right now?
I'm not, actually. And it's something I think about quite a bit, just because typically with heavy equipment, you're talking about lots of noise, diesel smoke, and the most commonly used types of equipment are diesel burning engines.
Right.
Yeah, I have yet to see them on a job site, and there's potentially some applications that I'd like to see that I'm hoping we can talk about today.
Can you tell us what some of those applications are?
Sure. Where the applications might lie would be in a broad range of construction activities. So you could have zero-emission heavy equipment operating in everything from residential construction, building homes, all the way to building power lines.
How do you see like zero emission vehicles performing on construction sites? Like how does it differ from just your traditional heavy duty machinery?
One of the main things, I guess, would be when the machine is operating and being used, it's working and using battery power. But when it's idle and not working or being used for, let's say, digging a hole or whatever, the machine doesn't have to be consuming energy.
Right.
So it's essentially turned off. And with electric devices, we can flip a switch and turn them on, turn them off. But with heavy equipment, you can't do that, especially in the winter.
So there's a lot of idling.
There is a lot of idling. Yeah. And what typically happens is somebody will start the machines in the morning and they will run for as long as they're needed until the end of the day.
So they're not being shut off at all during the course of the day?
Not if they can avoid it.
Yeah. What are some challenges with integrating zero emission vehicles into construction sites right now? Because as you mentioned, there are, ZEVs available in heavy duty machinery, but they're not really being adopted. What do you think some of the challenges are to adoption?
There are a few come to mind. One of the challenges might be that let's say somebody, they're a contractor who operates equipment and they have a fleet of machines. And in order to switch over to battery, they have to invest a little bit more in the power source for that, either a charging station or some form of like a different change of practice to allow them to integrate that into their daily operations. But eventually, this will become more common and easier for people. So it would essentially involve investing in their company a little bit differently. And let's say instead of budgeting in a project for fuel use over time, they would have to put that expenditure up front to get the equipment.
Right. So the cost is it's a bit more upfront cost, but longer term savings.
Potentially.
Right.
One of the other aspects too is that the equipment isn't easily available. So let's say you're looking into adopting some of these machines, but where do you go? Who is going to be your equipment supplier? Who's renting them out to let people try these out too? So some of it is availability. And most of the companies that are producing electrified heavy equipment are overseas, unfortunately.
Is that part of the work that you're doing, is trying to make these heavy duty equipments a little bit more accessible here in Alberta?
Well, I'm definitely advocating for it. And every time I have the opportunity to speak with a contractor, let's say, who is operating a piece of heavy equipment, I ask them if they've ever seen or heard of the electrified option and if they could think of any benefits to it.
Yeah, and spread some awareness about it.
Yeah.
It's usually the first step, because it sounds similar to when electric vehicles were just kind of coming onto the market, right? It was really hard to find them because a lot of dealerships didn't carry them, and now you can get an EV at almost any dealership. How do you envision these types of EVs changing the future of construction?
One of the aspects would be an improvement in the air quality on a job site. There'd be reduced noise levels. Anybody who's worked near heavy equipment knows that diesel smoke and fumes and the exhaust is not pleasant to breathe in and can be really irritating for people. So with electrified heavy equipment, you would have a much quieter work area, which will reduce accidents and the improvement in people being exposed to less things that will be polluting.
Yeah.
And then also with this technology, we're seeing GPS and autonomous capabilities, and a lot of makers of equipment like this are integrating sensors in it for collision avoidance and things like that.
Are you able to share a little bit about the research that's being done in the heavy duty machinery zero emission space?
Yes, I can. And there's a few different areas, such as battery technology being a big one. So that'd be higher energy density, faster charging, improved durability to withstand different environmental conditions. There's also hydrogen fuel cell development, which could potentially be like a bridge between diesel fuel run vehicles to battery or electrified equipment. And then there's also vehicle or machinery optimization. So say, for example, with pile drivers, like on a solar farm, you would need to have potentially tens of thousands of piles driven to mount the racking for the modules. And that could have the autonomous GPS location and everything. And those things on, let's say, a solar farm project run start to almost finish. And then, optimizing vehicles for their function and kind of making them more specific. And then there's also reducing the weight of a vehicle or machine potentially and maximizing the powertrain efficiency. Outside of that, you have like infrastructure development. So, creating that supply chain and, capabilities for a contractor to start implementing these type of things. So that could be like a charging network for new projects, or say if like a city knows that it's going to be expanding, or let's say building a ring road, they could potentially have different sites where contractors can combine resources to
maximize
the efficiency around that. And then also there's hydrogen refueling stations, as you may know, being worked on within Alberta. And then with all of that, you also have integration and fleet management. So that could include telematics and data analytics. So optimizing vehicle usage or machinery usage, predicting the maintenance needs like we talked about, and managing the energy consumption for a construction fleet. And so like typically in a construction fleet, you'll have trucks, off-road vehicles, you'll have small equipment and large equipment. So as I mentioned, the skid steers and things like excavators, but you could also have dump trucks, which would be kind of similar to a semi-truck, I guess.
Yeah.
And also in construction, there's a lot of materials transported with semi-trucks as well.
Right.
Especially wire and all the solar panels and all that kind of stuff.
There seems to be a ton of research and development going on right now. So it seems like the future is optimistic.
Yeah. And a lot of the companies who are trailblazing in this area have been doing it for a couple of years already. So they've proven that the zero emission vehicles are possible in regard to heavy equipment. And it's just a matter of time before it's tested out in our climate and brought over to North America and adopted in Canada.
So in the beginning, we mentioned that you work with Women in Renewable Energies in their Alberta chapter. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that's being done there for the ZEV industry?
Most recently, we have had a project called Plugging Women into Zero-Emission Vehicles. That was partially funded with Natural Resources Canada, NRCan, and is part of the Canadian government's Zero-Emission Vehicle Awareness Initiative. That is aimed to generate more of an understanding of the barriers that impede women from entering the electric vehicle market, both as consumers and workers. To do that, there'd be events where women can go and test drive an EV. They can do in-person or online mentorship events and workshops. And there's also a survey that was conducted to collect information on EV ownership and careers in the EV industry.
And WiRE, which stands for Women in Renewable Energy, it's kind of based all over Canada and globally as well, but there are events happening here in Alberta.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Susan, this was such a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Susan Courty. If you'd like to weigh in on the conversation, don't forget that you can do so in the EV Life group on the AMA mobile app. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. I'll talk to you in the next episode.